a conversation with some of our local analysts. We have North Central College political science professor Stephen Caliendo standing by. What do you see from this situation that we have playing out today? A lot of people have said this might be the most minor of the cases that's proceeding forward against Donald Trump right now. What are your thoughts on it?
That's probably true. I mean, we know that the investigations at the federal level investigations, there are at least two of those, as well as the Georgia case, are probably more significant just in terms of magnitude. But, you know, if the message is that no person is above the law, then this has great importance as well. And so this is an indictment only. The arraignment will happen today. This is not a decision of guilt or not guilt at this moment, but the process begins today. It begins today, and it begins in the next few moments.
Yeah, certainly not decisive today, but there are some things that I guess could set a precedent after today. I mean, we've kind of already set a precedent just with him being indicted. But speak a little bit more to how things could proceed forward in ways that we haven't seen before.
Absolutely. It's a great point. The precedent is more political than it is legal. You know, I was reminding viewers this morning when I visited with y'all that President Nixon certainly would have been indicted had he not been pardoned by President Ford after he left office. And so, you know, we have a history of the potential, but this is the first indictment. The reason this gets particularly complicated is because President Trump is also a political candidate. He very early, he was the first Republican to declare that he was going to be running for president in 2024. And so now all of this happens within the context of a political candidate running. And so the optics there are difficult. But there's also some legal things, too, in terms of being able to raise money under the auspices of a campaign, but being used for legal defense. A lot of that is different because President Trump is a candidate at this point.
Right. And of course, all of this stems back to his candidacy back in 2016. We're looking live here as the crowds build. Obviously, the New York City police really made sure that all of their officers were out today in uniform today to prevent any type of scene like we saw in 2020. What goes through your mind when you see these crowds building?
Well, this is as American as it can be in terms of protest and letting one's voice be heard on all sides of an issue. You know, there's no way to escape the politics of this. It's not simply a legal issue. It very much is political. And I don't say that in a pejorative way and to suggest that it's not meaningful. But again, because we are talking about a former president and because we're talking about alleged crimes that took place within the context of a campaign, as you rightly mentioned, 2016 campaign, not to mention that we have a current presidential candidate. That's what's supposed to happen. But you're also right in terms of New York City's preparedness. We certainly shouldn't have expected the Capitol Police, for instance, in January of 2021 to be ready for what they had to encounter. But New York City is a city that has a lot of history, as we do here in Chicago, of dealing with protests and being prepared. And so I expect things to be mostly peaceful today.
Yeah, so I was saying with Karen Conti just a short while ago that there were some major developments overnight just in his other cases. Talk about maybe, as we said, if this case is more minor, what is major that he's facing?
I think that the other three major investigations are all very significant. You know, we have the case of interference in the encouraging what happened on January 6th. That's a federal investigation. We have the classified documents being removed from the White House and taken to Mar-a-Lago, and then an argument that there may be obstruction of trying to get those back. That's significant. And then there's a case in Georgia. The famous phone call with the former President Trump called a perfect phone call. But not only that, all the activities related to trying to get the Georgia election to flip from a Biden win to a Trump win in 2020. And so all three of those are very significant. I think what's important to remember is they're not coordinated. So I've heard a lot of folks, including pundits, talk about, you know, why go first with this particular indictment, this is not a coordinated effort. This is a New York only case. The Georgia case is a Georgia case, and the federal cases are federal cases, and they're not coordinating with each other in any meaningful way. There's no reason to. Furthermore, there is a statute of limitations related to this particular case and why it would move forward quickly. I've heard arguments that it's expired, but New York law indicates that when somebody is out of office, or excuse me, out of the state, that statute of limitations pauses. Furthermore, as we heard from the Mueller report, it was clear from the Justice Department, at least at the federal level, that a sitting president could not be indicted. And so it's difficult. You can't have it both ways. You can't say, well, you couldn't indict me while I was president, and then say, well, now I'm not president anymore. It's been too long. But that will be part of what the judge hears and part of the argument that former President Trump's legal team will be making.
So that's an interesting part of it, too. When you say, well, if I'm a sitting president and I can't be indicted, now we have former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson, who's come forward and declared his candidacy for 2024. And he's saying that this entire situation should be disqualifying for the 2024 election. Maybe speak to that. How could this impact 2024?
Well, the immediate impact is going to be that the former president will have to be fighting a bunch of legal battles in the midst of campaigning for first nomination to be the Republican nominee, and then if he is chosen as the nominee throughout next summer to be president of the United States. And so that's a big distraction. It's a financial burden for sure in terms of what he's able to raise and do. But the other part of it is it's really important to keep in mind that each of these four investigations are separate. They're going to be on separate time frames. And so we don't know exactly where things will be. This drops first. There'll be an arraignment today, but it could be a year until there's an actual trial. And so we are definitely in unprecedented territory in terms of what happens if a president is convicted of a felony or even convicted of a misdemeanor. The Constitution's silent on this. It doesn't say that somebody indicted of or somebody that was convicted of a felony cannot be president of the United States. But the American people are going to have to weigh in on this as well.
You mentioned Nixon in this conversation. What is the closest thing, maybe? Is that the closest thing that we have seen to what we're experiencing now?
Probably in terms of substance, it's the closest thing. I think for viewers who are younger than me, including you, we might remember President Clinton a little bit better. President Clinton, there was some unprecedented action there because there was a civil case that went the whole way to the U.S. Supreme Court, where the president's lawyers argued a sitting president should not be involved in a case like this because any of us could sue a president. And the argument, the Supreme Court said, well, the alleged activity took place before he was president, so it's not something about his duties. And famously, they wrote that it should not be unduly disruptive. The reason you go through the discovery phase, of course, in a timely manner is so people's memories aren't damaged or people don't forget facts.
And
so
Stephen, as you're saying that we are seeing Donald Trump now. Right. We are seeing Donald Trump now leave out of the motorcade and enter into the courthouse again for that arraignment here, which is, of course, why all of this is taking place today. The arraignment of Donald Trump on criminal charges here, the first former president, as you were giving us some of the background as to what would be close to this that we've seen before.
Right, and so President Clinton wasn't truthful under oath, and so that impeachment proceedings went forward. He was not removed from office, of course, but he did have consequences after he left office, and some arrangements that were made for him to suspension of his law license, for instance, in lieu of indictment. And so it's possible that without those negotiations, without the pardon from President Ford or for President Nixon, that we would have had a former president indicted before. In this particular case, though, those things did not happen. The facts didn't fall the same way, and we've had, again, there's 3 other investigations happening, but at least one indictment of former President Trump.
Thank you so much. Again, North Central College political science professor Stephen Caliendo for staying with us and kind of walking us through expectations and the historical perspective as to what we are seeing today. Thank you.
It's wonderful to be with you. Have a good afternoon.
Appreciate it. I'm sure we'll be calling you back. Let's get over